Honor of Kings launches June 20th globally, and here is everything you need to know for the global launch. I'm going to give you a little bit of everything in this video, some beginner tips, some things that are a little more advanced. We're not going to go crazy deep because you are just starting this game alongside a ton of the world. However, it's been out for a while in major markets, so there is a lot going on. First, I want to say a huge thank you and a shout out to Honor of Kings for sponsoring this video. I was so excited to play this game, so when they reached out and wanted me to make a video for it, I was very, very stoked. Thank you very much to our sponsor, Honor of Kings. You can download the game in the description below or basically everywhere. This game is out on June 20th. Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, let's do this thing. First off, I want to start talking about what this game is. This is a MOBA, and if you've not played a MOBA before, what have you been doing? Living under a rock? You haven't, right? I hope not. A MOBA is a multiplayer online battle arena. You've seen games like this. They are games where you typically have 5 heroes on one side versus 5 heroes on another side, and the matches last somewhere between 10 minutes or so to an hour. Well, Honor of Kings is a great mobile version of that with fast-paced matches, and I think you're really gonna love it, especially if you've been following my channel for a while, as we've been covering a ton of fast-paced MOBAs. If you've never played a MOBA before, this could be a little overwhelming, but I'm going to try to walk you through it, give you a really good idea of what you'll be doing in Honor of Kings so that you can head on in there and dominate your first few games. First, let's just talk about what's going on in this game and what your win condition is. Let's talk about the win condition in a game of Honor of Kings. And to do that, we'll need to talk about the map a little bit. So there are 3 lanes in a map for Honor of Kings. We have the Clash lane, which is the top lane, the mid lane, which is the, well, mid lane, and the farm lane, which is our bottom lane. We also have this large jungle-like area on both sides of the map that is known as the jungle. On this map, you'll find neutral monsters that are between the lanes and in the jungle. You'll also find some bigger monsters that give powerful buffs. We'll talk more about the jungle in a moment. In your lanes, you're going to find minions that are spawning. There are melee minions, mage minions, ballista minions, cannon super minions, but in general, you're going to have waves of minions that are coming from your side versus waves of minions coming from your opponent's side. You'll also see large bushes on the map. They provide vision cover. You won't be able to see past them, and you won't be able to see enemies hiding inside them. This is very important for your junglers or one of your allies or enemies that are rotating from one of the lanes to set up powerful ganks. I'll talk about ganks as well at some point. If you've never heard the word, welcome to MOBAs. Behind your tower, you will find this small healing dew that will restore your health, and you will also find a primal portal that can teleport you between lanes. In order to win in Honor of Kings, you're going to need to coordinate with your team, push lanes, defeat enemy towers, and eventually break through to the enemy base and destroy their crystal. The matches in Honor of Kings are fast-paced. They last between about 15 and 20 minutes. Of course, there are other game modes like Mini Gorge that will give you sort of that same experience in a condensed form between 8 and 10 minutes. But in general, you're going to be playing for about 15 to 20 minutes, which is amazing because if you got an hour to play the game, you'll have multiple opportunities to head into a match and start to refine your tactics. There are also more modes for casual gameplay. There is a boot camp, which I highly recommend you check out so you can learn a lot of the game mechanics more in depth. I think the game has some really excellent in-game tutorials, and of course, a solo practice area that you can kind of just mess around and figure out a lot going on in the game. The center of the map is divided by this river that you are able to traverse up and down. You'll be able to set up lots of great fights, and of course, a ton of clashes are going to happen here early and mid-game before you start pushing towards the enemy base. I'll talk more about some map-specific stuff later. Right now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the heroes, because there are a ton of them. Over 80 heroes are in Honor of Kings, and that can feel like a lot at first. So let me give you the basics of what's going on here. Your heroes are broken up between the Clash lane, mid lane, farm lane, jungling, and roaming inside the hero selection area. There are also multiple classes for each of the heroes. Often found in the jungle, you will find characters with the assassin role. Assassins are high burst damage, and they usually have high mobility, able to help secure big time KOs on your opponents. These characters are often a little trickier to use than some of the other characters in the game because they require a lot of experience and they also require a lot of mechanical skill. The next type of hero we're going to talk about are fighters. Fighters are often found in the Clash lane, which is the top lane, a lane that gives you a little extra experience early on. They're great at brawling your opponents, and as the game goes on, they can help you carry the match. Also present in that clash lane are tanks. Tanks are kind of similar to fighters, but they are mainly used for setting up big moments for your team, soaking up lots of damage, putting some crowd control on your enemies. They're not going to be doing as much damage as fighters are throughout the game, but they're going to help your team win some of the bigger fights. The next role I want to talk to you about are mages. Mages are found in the mid lane oftentimes, and they excel at having high burst damage from very, very long range, as well as amazing crowd control abilities. Usually you'll have one move, big time burst, one move, lots of crowd control, and then of course an ultimate move that's going to do a ton of damage. We'll talk about ultimates here in a little bit, but this is where you're going to find them. In that mid lane, winning that lane so that your team can set up some big time wins elsewhere on the map, or move to the middle lane to help you secure a big KO. In the bottom lane, or as the game calls it, the farm lane, this is where you'll often find your marksmen. Marksmen are long-ranged heroes that deal damage usually through their auto attacks. They're often known as an ADC, or attack damage carry. You get extra gold in this bottom lane, so this is why you have a character like this down here, because they need lots of gold so that they can get online, get their incredible items, and do crazy amounts of damage as the match progresses. Because they do so much auto attack damage, they're also really excellent later in the game at taking down towers and objectives. Finally, we have our support class, and our support class is exactly what it sounds like. They are a variety of different ways to support your team, whether that would be healing, crowd control, vision. There are lots of different versions of supports in the game, but you kind of get the idea. It's sort of your basic, like, I'm helping you win a lot of these fights. A team without a good support is going to have a lot of trouble against a team with a good support. They are often considered to be in the roaming lane, which is down in that bottom farm lane with your marksman, and you are using this to help your marksman really get powered up and then move to other lanes to support your team depending on what's happening throughout the match. And again, the game breaks these up, so you'll know which heroes are good in the clash lane, mid lane, farm lane, jungling, etc. But basically, you have a good idea of where everything goes. A marksman in support bottom, you've got a mage in the mid lane, you've got a jungler that's usually an assassin or possible fighter in that jungle, and then you have your top path that's going to either be a fighter or a tank. Let's just take a look at one of our heroes right here so you can get a good idea of what's going on the hero page. You get tons of great information right here. So you can learn all about your hero. You can learn about their passive right here. You actually get a good little video explaining how each character works if you are clicking on their moves. There's a lot of amazing stuff that you can find in here. As you can see, this character has a 1 move that does a nice big burst of damage right here, and then a 2 move that has some excellent crowd control attached to it. And then of course they have an ultimate. Every hero has an ultimate that works in various ways, but this is usually your most powerful move, and you set it up to help your team win big fights. Something I'd like you to notice as we're watching this move get cast right here, Blazing Brilliance. Look at the timer once it's done. Only 20 seconds of cooldown on this move. Something I've noticed about Honor of Kings is your moves are actually on a really low cooldown compared to a lot of other MOBAs, even your ultimate moves. So I would highly recommend being aggressive in these fights, and when it looks like it's time to move in for a big team fight, use those ultimate moves. You want to make sure you can wipe as many enemies off the map as possible. If you head into this screen right here, you can even get a detailed breakdown of the stats for each character. You can start setting things up like your arcana and your equipment. I wouldn't stress too much about this, but I will talk about this here in a moment. My big recommendation, depending on which hero you pick, just do what the game tells you at first. If you pick Lian Po, which by the way, I love Lian Po. This has been like one of my favorite early heroes so far. If you pick Lian Po and it tells you to go to the top path or the clash lane, go to the clash lane. Stay there, learn the game in that mode. You will start to understand things a lot better once you really learn the role of your hero. For all of your heroes, you are able to select their equipment inside of a match, but you can also just select what you're going to get early inside of a match, and you can go up to your recommended builds right here. You can either go with what the game gives you, or oftentimes they will give you a popular build or a high win rate build. If you click on hot down here, you'll be able to see like this number 1. This is a popular build for this hero, so you can take this into a match if you would like. The game has very good recommendations also for your heroes, so if you don't want to stress at all about items, don't stress about them. And then there is Arcana right here. This is a whole thing, and I don't even really want new players to think about it. It's kind of already set up to go for all of your heroes. There are some very specific things that you can do with this, but in general, I would just do what the game gives you until you get more advanced. You do not need to stress about this page yet at all. You also then have the skill that you bring into a match, and most heroes are set up with an ideal skill for them. So a lot of heroes have flash. You'll know this from a lot of games. The game I often play calls it an eject button. This is just a short dash, but there are lots of different ones. Smite is often used for your jungler. It will do a ton of true damage to some of the central, minions that you find in there. But in general, I would just not stress too much about this, and I would go with what the game gives you at first. Just learn how it works and you'll understand why they are pairing it with that hero. By the time you get better and better at this game, you will start to understand when you might change some of these skills. So let's take a look at our map together. We've talked a little bit about the lanes. Let's go through them quickly. We have our Clash lane here at the top. You actually get more experience early game in the Clash lane, which is why you have one hero up there, so it can get very, very strong. We have our mid lane, which is the shortest lane on the map, and you can also see the two tall bushes in the center there. It sets up a lot of opportunity for ganks, which is where an ally will come and help you, and you will have an outmanned fight against the other side. So if there are 3 of you and 1 of them, you are setting up a gank right there, looking for a big time KO on your opponents. The enemies here have high physical defense, but low magic defense, so this is why the mages stay in this mid lane. And then of course we have our farm lane, which is where our marksmen often are with one of our support heroes. Again, the ranged minions down here actually give you extra gold, so this lets you kit up early and get lots of different items. And then finally, of course, we have the jungle. This area you move through as a jungler so that you can make sure that you get a high level, make your way to one of the 3 lanes, and try to dominate a fight. You're going to move through with a pretty basic rotation of taking out the Azure Golem, and then finally finishing up with your red buff before you make your way to a big fight. Your jungler is often the hero that helps set up those ganks that we talked about earlier, where you have a player advantage and you try to pick up a big KO. Now let's talk about some important things to notice on our map. Let's head to our jungle. The Azure Golem. This is where you're going to start your rotation as a jungler. If you take this down, you will get yourself a blue buff that will give you mana regen and lower cooldowns on your moves. This is how you start moving through that jungle area to get yourself a ton of experience. The other buff you will find inside your jungle is from the Crimson Golem, and this gives you the red buff. This will be near the end of your first jungle rotation. You'll pick this up. This is going to slow your enemies when you're hitting them with your attacks, and it's also going to give you true damage against it. It's just another buff that you give to your jungler so it's able to pick up huge KOs. In our Clash lane, we have the side lane River Sprite. This is just a small little guy with a bag of gold. If you're able to sort of win your fight here in this Clash lane, you'll then take that opportunity and that advantage to take down the Sprite and get a gold advantage on your opponents. We have a similar thing in our bottom lane, and that is going to be the Firehawk. If you're able to take your opponents down, push minions towards their tower, you can then take this Firehawk and you can give yourself some nice gold bonus. The mid lane has a River Sprite as well that you are able to take if your opponents are pushed towards their tower. You can start doing damage to this and again get a gold advantage. In the early game, a lot of it's going to be focused on getting last hits on minions and then getting a gold advantage in all of your lanes possible. Now we're going to talk about some of the bigger objectives on the map, like the Tyrant. The Tyrant spawns here at 4 minutes. Once you take this down, your entire team will receive a buff. The Tyrant's buff will give your team a chain lightning effect that deals damage to enemy heroes on your attacks. Sort of mirrored opposite to our Tyrant, we have the Overlord. If you take down the Overlord, this is going to spawn some powerful waves in each of your lanes that push towards your opponents. It's also going to give you team-wide gold and experience. I should mention the Tyrant does the same thing with team-wide gold and XP. At the 10-minute mark, it becomes the Shadow Overlord and the Shadow Tyrant, which essentially are just the same things but more powerful. Finally, if your match makes it to the 20-minute mark, the Tempest Dragon is going to spawn, and this is sort of like the end game moment. If you are the team that takes down the Tempest Dragon, you have a very, very good chance of winning the entire match at this point. Your next waves in each of your lanes are replaced replaced by Tempest minions, which will give you the ability to disrupt enemy towers that will essentially shut them down for a moment so that you can do a ton of damage. Your team will also acquire the Storm Awakening buff. This is a crazy good buff that deals lightning damage to enemies based on their max health. It's just really, really strong, and you also get a blessing with a giant shield that absorbs 20 to 50% of damage based on your max health. This is just crazy powerful, and it really is one of the big endgame moments. You will often win the Tempest Dragon fight and then push and win the match. While we're here, let's talk about the phases of a match. At the beginning of a game, you have the start of it. At the 4-minute mark, the tower shields will then disappear. Jungle protection ends, which means now your opponents can move into your jungle and take some of those, wild minions a little bit better. It's actually harder early because all of your minions have protection on them. You also have the Tyrant and Overlord spawning at this moment, so the 4th minute is a huge shift in the game. At the 10-minute mark, you have the Shadow Overlord and Shadow Tyrant, and you also have cannons begin to spawn, and then of course the big moment at the 20-minute mark, the Tempest Dragon arrives. That fight again is like the fight if you make it to the 20-minute mark, but I found tons of matches end before the Tempest Dragon even hits the battlefield. Leveling in Honor of Kings is very simple. When you level, you will pick one of your 3 skills to level up. You can see that little hovering energy around my move 1 there on damage. That's the game's recommended level up option, so I would just go ahead and take that and then make your way into your lane here. Again, you'll be fighting as you continue to deal damage to these minions and get last hits. You'll get experience, you'll get gold, and you'll set yourself up to win the game. The more gold you get, the more items you will get, and the more levels you will get by getting these wild enemies here. And of course, if you can get a KO on your opponent, that would be huge. Jeez, he's almost going to give me a KO right away, you silly goose. Again, we are looking to get as much experience as we can and pick up new moves. As you continue to level, you get more moves. Level 3 will get you another one of your first move 1 or 2, and then at level 4 you will unlock your ultimate move. Now you can see items up at the top right sort of glowing up there. There are games that ask you to head back to your base to purchase. Honor of Kings is not one of them. Once you get the required amount of gold, you are able to just click that right there, and those items are immediately attached to you. It's that simple. You're going to want to make sure that you are winning your lane so that you can get big heaps of gold, and then by getting that, you will be able to get more items and, of course, hopefully outlevel your opponents so you can hit them with powerful abilities. These minions are really what you're fighting over here early. You want to try as best you can to land last hits. So what are last hits? You saw right there, I got 61 gold for taking down that minion. Now we're going to see what happens if I don't get the last hit here. I get 42 gold. So this game works on a last hit system. If you can, ideally, you want to be the last one to deal damage to the minions to get the maximum amount of gold possible. That won't always be something that you can do. In general, as long as you're kind of in the area of influence and dealing damage, that would be great. But if you can, pair your abilities up or pair your auto attacks up so that you're able to get that last hit. It's just going to give you more and more gold. Now, I talked a little bit about earlier about how you will want to try to take down some of these, nice little side objectives if you can. If you have pushed the enemy lane and you can afford to, you could set up an opportunity to take down like this little guy right here. You can do enough damage to it, and then you will be able to secure it and get a little extra gold. But of course, be careful, because if your opponent gets it with that last hit, then they are the one that takes all of the gold. Last hitting, especially on these neutral objectives, is so very important. Now, when it comes to lane minions, your opponent cannot hit their own lane minions, so it's a little easier to acquire those last hits, but it's a little tougher when it comes to the contested farm that you will find on the map. And as I mentioned before, your ultimate's on a pretty low cooldown, so I would recommend being aggressive with it. If you hit a nice crowd control ability, move in with your ultimate, wipe out all of the enemies in front of you, and try to win your lane. Once you move up to a tower, you'll notice another button unlocks. You can see it right there. I'm tapping it. That button allows you to target only the tower specifically with your base basic attacks. I think this is very important. When you're in range of the tower, of course you can try taking down the minions and things like this, but this is a great opportunity for you to deal damage to an enemy tower. Now, of course, if you're attacking an enemy near the tower or you're the first one in, the tower is going to target you, and that means you're going to go down. You need to be very careful in this moment. If you hit the tower, you're totally fine, especially if you have minions here. But if you start hitting the enemy with any of your auto attacks, it will immediately start targeting you, and it will take you down fast, dealing more and more damage every time the tower hits you. Now, I've got a couple more quick tips before I go, and I'll have some more detailed videos on my B tier channel talking a little bit about all of the different characters in this game as I start to unlock them and give you guides for them. One thing I want to talk to you about is the jungle. The jungle is very cool, and everyone wants to be here. I think it is not amazing for new players because there's so much riding on how well a jungle performs, but I'm just going to quickly show you how you clear through a jungle and what would be expected of you here. So I'm playing Lamb, an assassin character. You're going to move through the jungle doing as much damage as you can. You have your smite ability. That ability is going to help you KO some of these, wild monsters here in this central area. You're going to move through to that camp, now over to this camp, using your movement abilities to make it across. You're then going to come to these little boars right here. Sorry guys, but I'm a monster. Moving through, and then you are going to find your red buff right here, dealing as much damage as you can. Your smite would normally be back. You're going to take that down, and then you're going to take this pheasant. At this point, you have a decision to make, and that is where on the map you are going to go to give your team as much of an advantage as possible. Oftentimes inside of a MOBA, you want to find an opportunity to either help your squad when things are going poorly or to support your squad when things are going well. So if the enemies are pushed towards one of your towers, make it to one of those moments and look for a fight. Oddly enough, when enemies are actually pushed towards your tower, they are making a little bit of a mistake if you are doing a good job as your jungler. You're going to make it to one of these lanes, you're going to find a good opportunity to fight, and then you're going to rip through them dealing tons of damage, hopefully picking up a nice big KO and a first blood. If you can do that, you're doing great. And then after you deal some damage to your opponents, help your lanes out a little bit, you're going to head back to your jungle area for your spawns. You can see that little timer ticking up on your mini map right there. We've got 10 seconds right now until your blue buff is back. You'll clear through this area again and find another place on the map to give your team an advantage. That's the basics of jungling. My final tip I want to give you for Honor of Kings is a tip that I like to give with a lot of games, but I think it's very true, and it's important to remember this. You will only get to be new at this game and play through Honor of Kings for the first time one time. So enjoy it. Don't stress too much about min-maxing everything or having the exact best build. Start to learn the game, learn to play at your level, whatever competitive level that is, but just remember that you'll never be as fresh-eyed and excited and wandering into something new as you are right now. I hope you enjoy it. I want to give a huge shout out to Honor of Kings again for sponsoring this video. I'm going to have more videos with this game on my second channel, so please head on over there and check this out. I love you all. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good luck out there. We did it.